Good morning. We'll begin today's hearing, Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 2 on Education Finance. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarty.
Here.
Mr. Chavez.
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell. Here. Quorum is established.
Okay. This morning we'll be hearing the May revised proposals from the governor related to higher education. This includes the Prop 98 portion of the community colleges, as well as University of California, the Cal State system, and our Student Aid Commission. But before we get to that, we wanted to revisit this issue that we started earlier this year with some entities talking about the overarching issues of higher education in the first place, which is access, and what we're doing as a state to make sure we have enough college graduates to meet the economic and employment needs of our state's economy. So with that, we will start with issue number 1, informational item, and bring up the Public Policy Institute of California, PIPIC, to come back and enlighten us on what's going on in this front and what we could possibly do as a state legislative body in this issue.
Right. Thanks. Thanks, Chair McCarty and members. As you know, PPIC is a private nonprofit policy research institution. We do not take positions on pieces of legislation, but we do policy relevant work that affects the lives of Californians. And one of the key areas that we have started to do work in is on higher education. In fact, we've recently established a higher education center. And so what I'd like to do this morning is talk to you very briefly about a little bit of context, which is this workforce skills gap, and then go into some new work we've been doing at looking at exactly how we could close the projected workforce skills gap that we've developed. So as you might remember, PPIC has developed projections for California's economy that suggest by 2030 we will fall 1.1 million bachelor's degrees short of where workforce demand will be. Unless we have improvements in college enrollment and college completion. And what I'd like to do now, that you have actually some slides in front of you with the PPIC gold color. And two lines on that chart. The chart shows the annual number of bachelor's degrees awarded by all colleges and universities in California. And the gold line is a business as usual line. That means that current levels of college enrollment rates, completion rates, and transfer rates will persist over the next 15 years from 2015 to 2030. And the line is mostly flat because the population that is most likely to go to and graduate from college is expected not to grow much over the next 15 years. These are Department of Finance projections. The number of high school graduates, for example, a very key population, obviously, when we're talking about the supply of new college students, is projected to be relatively flat. So that's our baseline, business as usual line. The green line actually closes the workforce skills gap. It represents a 72% increase in the number of bachelor's degrees by 2030 over where we are today. That's a very ambitious scenario, obviously. But we have had past periods in California where we've seen that kind of growth in the number of bachelor's degrees. And even here, from 2002 to 2015, that gold line actually shows a 50% increase in the number of bachelor's degrees during that period, a slightly shorter period. And if we went back historically, for example, shortly after the master plan between 1965 and 1980, the number of bachelor's degrees awarded by the California State University system almost doubled. It increased 95%. So if we go to slide 3, we show you more specifically how we could close the gap. And it will require a number of different actions. Our focus in this work has been on public colleges and universities, but private colleges play a very important role. And realize that this is just one scenario among many. You could play around with each one of these levers. The key levers are enrollment, which we're using eligibility of high school graduates as a key indicator of enrollment. The second key lever is transfer from community colleges to four-year colleges and universities. And then the third key lever is improving completion and graduation rates for students who are already in college. And so let me just walk you through the assumptions that we've used in this changing the gap scenario. And realize, again, this is just one scenario among many in which you can close this 1.1 million gap. They're all ambitious, I will say that. And we're actually developing an interactive tool for you and your staff and other interested parties so that they can play around with their own goals for each one of these levers and see what that means with respect to whether it will close the gap or not. So, for example, on eligibility shares, we show that for UC and CSU, those shares would have to increase from the shares that were established 50 years ago and have not been changed for 50 years, with the top 1/3 of high school graduates being eligible for CSU, the top 1/8 being eligible for UC, and our target would increase CSU eligibility to 40%. That would be phased in over an 8-year period. That's the second line right there below the 40%. And at UC, it would increase to 17.5%, again phased in over 8 years. The number of transfer students would have to increase 35% to both UC and CSU, phased in over a 5-year period. And the number of the graduation rate, these are 6-year graduation rates. We also have in our model graduation rates for transfer students, which require a similar proportional increase. For CSU, graduation rates right now, 6-year graduation rates are at 57%. Of entering students finished within 6 years. For the target projection is 74%, and that would be phased in over a 15-year period, so by 2030. And for UC, the target is 92%, phased in over a 10-year period. If you turn to slide 4, you'll see what this means in terms of the relative contribution of each one of the higher education segments in California with respect to closing the gap. So the first line there shows that our closing the gap scenario would produce 4.1 million, a little over 4.1 million college graduates by 2030. Excuse me. The baseline scenario has only a total of 3.1 million. This is accumulated over this entire period. The difference there is 1.1 million, the number we need to close the gap. Almost half of the increase comes from one institution. That's the California State University system, and that's because it is the largest system. And there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'll get to that in the next slide. UC would contribute about a fourth of the closure of the gap. Private nonprofits would play an important role. And then this other line includes private for-profits, but other sources of bachelor's degrees, which could be anything from increased migration above and beyond what we've already projected in our baseline scenario to things like applied bachelor's degrees offered by the community colleges, a very small drop in the bucket right now, but who knows what the potential might be there. If we go to slide 5, we see that I break this down for UC and CSU in terms of the most important drivers of closing the gap. And there you see at CSU, which is the middle category there, and then the bottom number, that almost half, about 240,000 of the additional degrees, would come through this improved graduation rate target. This is really kind of the lowest hanging fruit in our system. A lot of students who've done everything right, they've gotten into the system but have not graduated. And as I noted earlier, it's well over 40% of CSU students do not finish right now. CSU is making progress. We have a report that's going to be coming out and presented here in Sacramento on Thursday that talks about the graduation initiatives at CSU and the progress that's being made there. But our target includes very ambitious further improvements in graduation rates at CSU, and that would close at almost half of the contribution from CSU. In contrast at UC, which doesn't have as much room in terms of improving completion rates because they're already fairly high, almost half of the increase would come simply through the eligibility target increase alone. Okay, so now let's turn to slide 6. You know, the big question is, are these plausible? And as I've said many times, they're very ambitious. But let's think a little bit about plausibility. So here, this chart shows you the share of high school graduates that have completed the A through G courses. This is a good measure of how many students might be eligible for UC or CSU. And you'll see that from 2007-8 to today, that the share of high school graduates completing those courses has gone up from 32% to 43%. This is a very strong and remarkable increase, and it's actually at a pace that's slightly higher than our eligibility index increases would occur in our projection. The good news is we see A through G completion going up for every ethnic group in California. The bad news is that gaps are not narrowing. It is clear, and I can't overemphasize this point enough, that reaching our targets in California will require closing access and achievement gaps for all groups, and that we cannot get there without strong increases for Latinos, African Americans, first-generation students, and low-income students. Okay, if we go to slide 7, now turning to the transfer targets that we've set, here's the history of what's happening in terms of the number of transfer students at UC over this entire time frame, which goes from 1994 to 2014-15. There have been strong increases, and you'll see that there have been years where the increases have been very strong. Remember, our target was a 35% increase over 5 years, so there have been periods where that's been achieved in the past with UC. For CSU, you see a very volatile and less strong increase that's occurred over time. The volatility is related to budget issues, but you'll see, when we had the spike down related to the recession and the budget declines there, you saw a spike up afterwards, which suggests that at least there is some capacity for increase and an ability to respond to budgets. So perhaps there is some room there for additional increases in transfers. Again, I think budgets are going to be a key part of this. And then if you turn to slide 8, we look at improvements in graduation rates. So again, the targets for UC were 92% phased in over an 8-year period. And you see that UC's increase over the last 15 years has only been about 7%, so that's more ambitious than what they've seen. CSU has had strong increases in graduation rates from 40% graduating within 6 years to 57%. That's a 17 percentage point increase. Our projection for 2030 and our target is a 74% level, which is also a 17% increase. So it's very consistent with what's happened historically. But of course, moving from 40 to 57% might be easier than moving from 57 to 74%. So no doubt, again, these targets are very ambitious. So in conclusion, I think the finding of this most recent work is that closing the workforce skills gap is not impossible. Success is obviously going to require a persistent and concerted effort. And no doubt, because we're talking about having more students in the system as well as more efficiencies, funding and priorities are going to be a key to getting this done. So thanks very much. Appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you. I forgot to note earlier, we're joined today by our colleague, Mr. Medina, who chairs the Higher Education Committee, and he and I, of course, jointly held this first hearing earlier this year on the same topic. Questions or comments from committee members? Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes, with regard to slide 8, it talks about 6-year graduation rates for first-time freshmen. So obviously these are individuals who enter. I'm more interested in the CSU side, if you will, the orange line. Again, I'm on page 8. Obviously, these are people who enter the CSU as freshmen and stay for that duration. They don't take any time off in between, skip any semesters.
Some do, actually. So this is a 6-year rate. So you could actually have started as a freshman, maybe taken a semester off, but still finished within 6 years.
Hmm. What if you're part-time? You fully intended to be part-time?
So there are some students who are fully part-time for their entire duration at CSU.
Right.
It's actually a very, very small number.
Probably is.
And the share of students that graduate past 6 years is quite small. It might increase their completion rate a couple percentage points. There might be people at CSU in the room who know the exact figure, but it's actually not very many people.
Is there any data that shows what happens with a transfer student and
yes,
once they enter the CSU and their duration?
So I haven't shown you here, but in our model we also include transfer students and have a 4-year graduation rate for those students. They're very high. I don't remember them off the top of my head. They've also been going up over time, so that there is both a track record of improvement and our projection suggests more improvement. I think one of the key issues really that we haven't talked about specifically here is what might be able to be done with returning students. So students who don't just leave for a semester or two, but maybe who leave for 4 or 5 years and are maybe 12, 30 units short of completing. And there is an effort by CSU Online to get students to return and complete degrees that way. So to the extent that effort is more and more successful, it would add to the bachelor degrees that we're talking about.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Medina.
Yes, I'd like to thank PPIC and California Competes for their work, valuable work. So maybe I'm going to ask a question in the reverse. if California does nothing, if we just keep the status quo, and we don't get 1 million more college graduates, what would that mean to California?
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, supply will equal demand in 2030. So we will either have a more highly educated population, and along with that comes more social and civic engagement, also comes higher incomes, more tax revenue. If we don't meet this challenge, we will have lower tax revenues. We will have more demand for social services. We will be a less wealthy society in all aspects of the word wealthy. I think this is the reason PPIC has established a higher education center. The reason why we're doing this work is we think this is one of the biggest issues facing California going forward, if not the biggest issue.
And I see the A through G requirements increasing at all, with all groups, all ethnic groups. Latino, though, lagging behind and increasing. But even as those numbers increase, or the percentages increase, when the students enter college, we still see students struggling to be college ready in math and English, even though these numbers go up.
Yeah. Well, so to be clear, the share of students who need remediation at CSU has been going down. It's still a pretty high share of students who need remediation. But CSU's record with successful remediation of those students is quite strong. The community colleges are where there's a tremendous issue with remediation. We're also doing some work looking at some alternative policies or practice with respect to math remediation that shows some promise, and we'll be coming out with that work later. But I think if we're going to solve the problem of lack of preparedness, obviously it has to happen in the high school side, but there are things that colleges can do and are doing to have more success with, first of all, placement of students, whether students really need remediation or not. It's a big issue. And then secondly, with successfully remediating those students. And as I said, CSU actually has a pretty good track record. The community colleges are working towards improving theirs.
And maybe following up on Mr. O'Donnell, the students who are in CSU and UC and don't finish in 6 years, what happens to them?
So most students who don't finish within 6 years never finish. And they go out and they live their lives. And I think that is one part of this that we're going to be expanding on. We're going to be doing more work looking at the equity components of this, although we've looked at some of those already. And as I've said, like on completion rates, we need to close those gaps. There's no doubt about that. But when we look at the potential pool of students who are past traditional college age who could possibly return and finish degrees, it's huge in our state. And that's something that, we should be thinking about.
So you propose here to get to 1 million, increasing USC and CSU's, the percentage of students that they accept.
For UC and CSU, yeah.
That hasn't changed in how many years?
50 years.
50 years.
Yeah. Now, there is an eligibility study going on right now that's looking at what that share. So we don't actually know right now what share of high school students are applying to and eligible for UC and CSU. It's not just taking the A through G courses, of course. It's also having certain grade point average and SAT scores. There's a study going on that's going to show what that is. It's quite possible that UC, for example, is accepting more than the top 1/8 right now, and we'll find out when that study's done. It's being done by the governor's office. So our projection here of increasing that to 17.5% might not be as ambitious as it sounds, but yes.
Have there been discussion with UC and CSU?
So I've had some informal discussions with UC and CSU. I'm sure that they'll be able to provide you with their more formal responses.
Interesting, very short story came out in the Wall Street Journal today that Congress is looking at a pilot program to allow high school students to give Pell Grants to high school students who would be enrolled concurrently in college classes. And I'm not sure if California was mentioned or not, but it's interesting, the concept of trying to work with high school students to get them better prepared for college, giving them a direct college experience while they're still in high school. So it'd be interesting to watch to see what happens.
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. O'Donnell, follow-up question? I'll have some as well.
I do have just a topic you brought up. You brought up the topic of high school students transferring into community college, specifically math ability, because that seems to be a big challenge for sure. I was one of those guys, actually. Have you done study on that? Are you doing more study on that?
So we're doing work right now on that. The community colleges have been a great partner in providing us with longitudinal student data that includes the courses they take. And what's happening in math remediation right now, basic skills education in math in the community colleges, is there's a lot of new innovations. For example, accelerated courses called StatWays, which focus more on probability and statistics rather than a traditional math sequence to get students ready for college-level courses in non-STEM majors. There's also concurrent remediation where you take college-level courses and then at the same time you're remediating in math. So there's a lot of innovation occurring. There has not been a large-scale systematic study of those kinds of interventions, and that's what we're doing right now.
Are you looking at the way different community colleges even test math aptitude?
Well, so I think we are not right now, but there's another group of efforts that are occurring at the community colleges that will require, and technically colleges are required to use multiple measures now in placement. But what often happens is students will take an exam, like it's called an AccuPlacer exam, that will place them. And even if, for example, they've done very well in math in high school, if they fail that exam, they will, at most colleges, be placed in some sort of remediation course in math. And that might even be if they'd gotten A's in high school math, even up to Algebra 2, for example. Or even if they'd taken calculus and passed it. If you fail that exam, you might be placed in remediation. So there's a big effort now to improve the remediation process, and some early indicators, Long Beach City College is one, have shown that they've actually substantially reduced the number of students who get put straight into remediation. And at the end of the day, those students are much more likely to succeed in college-level courses than they would have had they been forced to remediate ahead of time.
And then that's because they're using multiple measures and not just basing everything on that test down in Long Beach, correct? Exactly.
And colleges right now are adopting, first of all, a common placement measure across the colleges, a common exam. So that's part of the change. But there is also then this movement to try to ensure colleges are using things like high school records as well. Yeah, and Long Beach City College.
And because at Long Beach, I think it seems some data out of there proves that single test isn't the biggest predictor of one's ability to be successful.
This is true for four-year colleges and universities too. The single best predictor of how well you will do in a four-year college or university are your grades and how well you did in high school. And the SAT scores, for example, give you a little added predictive ability with respect to success, but the effect of grades and course rigor are far more important in predicting college success, whether it's community colleges or four-year colleges.
Well, tell me this. Maybe you know the answer to this. Are community colleges required to give a test for math aptitude?
I should know, and I'm not positive. They all use it. I mean, they do need to assess whether students are ready for college-level courses. It is the case that a student can not follow the test placement, and they can actually object to the placement, and that's where sometimes the multiple measures get used only at that point in some colleges, which I think is not the right point to use them. It's too late in the game, and most students don't know that they can do that in any event. So I think it is the case that probably every community college in California is using some sort of standardized test to place students. Some of them have their own tests that they've developed.
Correct, but there's no one statewide test.
No, there is actually a common assessment test now that has been developed that's and realize the governance system of the community colleges is that each community college district has its own board of governors or regents or trustees, whatever they might call them, and they can decide what they will do. So the state has clearly the funding carrot or stick and the policy to adopt a common assessment tool across the community colleges is coming from the Chancellor's Office of the community colleges, but they cannot force every community college district to use that common assessment. They're offering some incentives for them to use it, which include helping them pay for the costs of administering and developing those tests. And I don't know what the status is in terms of how many colleges have adopted that common assessment yet. I believe, I would not be surprised if it's a majority, but there are others who could tell you for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a few questions. Oh, you have some, Mr. Chavez? No, you go ahead, Mr. Chavez.
I want to go over some of your numbers so I can understand them. On your page 4, your baseline scenario of $3 million and closing the gap scenario of $4 million. Those are so if I understand it, use the baseline to $3 million. Over the next 15 years, those are the amount of degrees would be awarded?
Yes, by all California colleges and universities under current practices.
So we're looking at about $200,000 a year?
Exactly.
Coming out? And you need to increase that? Now, looking at the population charts, since we're looking at 3 and 4 million over 15 years here, the age group, according to the Department of Finance, for college age 18 to 24 in 2020 is 3.8 million. So, and that's a 6-year shot. So, what percent of the California population are you assuming needs to have a degree?
So our projections are that 40% of California, to close the gap, it would be 40% of Californians would need to have a bachelor's degree or higher.
Is that an assumption, or is that's the number?
That's the target.
That's the
so
target?
that's based on the economic projections, which show that in California, as in the rest of the United States, as in the developed world, and in fact, even less developed world, the demand for more highly skilled workers has been going up consistently. This is a phenomenon that's been occurring for decades and decades and decades, and those projections are simply, the economic projections are simply a continuation of what's been happening for a long time.
Your term is highly skilled workers, right?
Well, highly skilled and highly educated. So it's a very good point, because there are a lot of highly skilled workers who are not highly educated, and I hate to say there are a lot of highly educated workers who are not very highly skilled. Educational attainment is for better or worse, it's the best proxy we have. And when we look at labor market outcomes, we see, for example, that wage gains from earning a college degree are at all-time highs. They've been going up over the decades. So we do know that acquiring that college degree for most people, but not all, is a very important determinant of their labor market success. But certainly there's a range. Some don't do as well. There's a range according to majors as well. We've talked about a lot of that in some of our past work. But on average, for most students, earning that college degree will lead to substantial wage and employment gains, and that those wage and employment gains, again, are at all-time highs. And partly, honestly, it's part of what's driving increased inequality in the United States and California.
Now, in your analysis, and the reason I'm asking is because on Friday I was at NECA, and NECA is a training center for electricians, and it's a unionized program. And people coming out of that program, once they become journeymen, they're making $80,000 to $100,000 a year, which are considerably more than, let's say, a bachelor's degree for a teacher. So